Hello guys, welcome to Kadic Reviews, more specifically, Happy Halloween. And much like most years here, we have a Halloween special. This year, I've decided to choose the first of a series of movies from my favorite quote-unquote horror series. I call it more of a horror comedy rather than a horror series. Which one am I talking about? Final Destination, written and directed by James Wong. Yeah, I think it's that one. The same one that gave us Insidious later on. The one that gave us Annabelle. A guy that's a pretty big deal in the horror space now. I think it's the same guy. But why call it a horror comedy? Because as much as it tries to drive up horror, it really doesn't. Its main focus, however, is centered around a group of high school seniors getting ready to go on a plane trip to France. But our main character manages to have a pretty grim vision. A vision of a plane explosion. Upon seeing it, he manages to get a few of his fellow students off the plane just in time to see the explosion. But as the coroner tells him, you can't really cheat death. You can only avoid it eventually. So, in typical slasher flick horror fashion, each of the surviving students gets picked off one by one as death designs it. Yeah, there isn't much of a script here. Most of the acting is pretty simple horror acting. Although some of the characters turn out well and some of the characters don't. Nearly half the cast ends up dead in this thing by the time we get through it. In fact, there are only two survivors at the end of this thing. The main male lead and the main female lead. But Final Destination makes up for its lack of horror movie traditions by doing a few other things. Most notably, its camera work and its subtle teases and references. You see, in Final Destination, every death is tipped off in several ways, in fact. Things popping up in the background, use of subliminal wordplay spoken by characters or given a visual gag, but most notably, a musical hemorrhage. All of the Final Destination movies pick a song that triggers death's design. In the case of the first Final Destination, it's John Denver's Rocky Mountain High. If I ever do all the other Final Destination movies, I'll make a note of all the other musical references it makes. But also most notably in the first movie is the use of water to signify death's movement. From the first death on, water or any form of liquid base is used as the default final sign and trigger, as well as the use of lightning. But As the deaths pile up, the high school characters appropriately get more paranoid. As the lead character figures out the design and who's next in the order, and ultimately how to break it, each character gets more and more paranoid as their deaths get closer. But the thing that makes Final Destination a comedy is not the dialogue. Hell, based on how old this movie is, you could call the dialogue comedic at this point. But no, it's not the dialogue, even though there are a few funny lines in there. No, it's the way that each character kicks the bucket. The way the deaths are done in the Final Destination series as a whole get more and more ludicrous as each movie goes on. The first movie keeps it surprisingly simple, while still being insanely absurd. Oh, getting hung up by a shower curtain, or blowing your house up because of a tea kettle you left on too much and around a bottle of vodka. Getting decapitated by a razor at the end of train tracks and having one of the main characters' heads get cleanly decapitated off of their head in such a way that it's Mortal Kombat levels of lunacy. This would establish the Final Destination series in its future iterations, and the versions of death would almost become comical that by the end of the third movie in the series, all horror, tense, and pretense was thrown out the window for bombastic death. And it shows here. Final Destination, the first one, is the tamest of this group of mass spread death. But it seemed with every movie, the ante had to be delivered. And the point of that eventually we all die is a rather somber and saddening note. It's the fear of knowing there's no escaping it. Unlike other slasher-based movies where the killer can be killed or outright avoided, in the case of this movie, it's telling you your time is coming. And if you try to avoid it, the way I'm just going to off you is worse. This even comes down to the end of movie death, which would become a constantly growing gag in the rest of the series. Notice, I use the term gag here. These final deaths are often sudden and the most comedic, as the main character of the movie almost kicks the bucket. And oh yeah, there's a lot of fake out deaths too in this thing to throw you off. Only to see the last male character that is not the main get the death that is intended for him instead in a comedic form. So even as the credits roll, you are left to know that death gets the last laugh. In fact, that's the best way to describe the Final Destination movies as a whole. Death will always get the last laugh. The first movie does a good job at setting it up, while the future movies, mainly 2 and 3, do a better job at making the deaths themselves as bombastically ludicrous as the idea. The first Final Destination does the best job at being a genuine horror movie due to its camera work, its musical work, and its constant teases, with the deaths not being too over the top. But near the end, you could tell that's going to be the entire premise of this thing. And that's why Final Destination, oddly, is one of my favorite horror series. In fact, it is my favorite horror series. Call me loony or insane or morbid or nuts. You can do all that. You'd be right. But is Final Destination a good movie? It depends. For its great camera work, its great setup, and its then original idea, although the movie hasn't aged well, if you look at it more as a comedy rather than a strict horror film to scare you, you'll have a little bit more fun. But as a strict horror movie, it's not all that great. That's why we here at Kadic Reviews give Final Destination, the first one, out of 6 of these things, an appropriate and oddly ironic 6 out of 10. If you want me to keep doing the concurring sequels, you can tell me down in the comment section, because it definitely gets more absurd from here. And whatever your favorite horror series is or horror themed game, make sure on this Nightmare Night, my fellow ponies, that you give it a shot. And enjoy Halloween and be safe out there, kids, if you're going trick-or-treating. We wouldn't want Death's design to hit you either. Find peace in your own nirvana, and I'll see you next time.